you will be keeping your time. What's the panel? 1, 2, 3. Right? And
Mr. Speaker, in a world where overpopulation is rampant, in a world where the sea levels are rising, in a world where the Arctic glaciers are melting, and most scientists agree that the landscape of the planet is going to be really, really different in about 100 years, we really think as a state that it is important to try as many methods as we can to go ahead and try to either stop this crisis or find a new place where we can live, right? We're okay with both these scenarios, right? Firstly, what are the problems with Earth, right? We think we have rampant overpopulation, right? We don't think we can curb the overpopulation because it's almost 200% now, right? The Earth has double the amount of people that it can actually sustain, right? We think a bulk of these are in its largest productive area in terms of land mass, which is the Asian like over greater continent, right? Which includes Asia, Russia, and like Europe, right? That entire landmass has about most of these people, and that is actually which is the most productive in terms of resources, right? Secondly, right, we think global warming is a real problem, and only Republicans disagree with this, right? What are we talking about, right? Firstly, the sea levels are rising. Scientists estimate that in the next 40 years, the sea levels are going to rise by 1 foot, right? Which basically means that Bombay is no longer going to exist in about like 100 years, right? We really think that's a realistic possibility, right? Secondly, we think another reason of this is because we're burning fuel, right? We think on Earth, we think scientifically, there are only a limited number of elements that can exist in a certain biosphere called Earth, right? Therefore, we've exploited all of these elements. We don't think you can like create, because right now we're synthesizing new elements, right? We're manufacturing them, but naturally occurring elements don't really exist anymore, right? Which is why we're forced to burn hydrocarbons of fuel, right? We think if we go to Mars, on another planet, there's a very realistic possibility that we could get an element which is not found on Earth, which could help us burn clean fuel or get clean fuel, which could really solve our problem, right? We also could get minerals and a lot of more space, right? Which if we can colonize Mars, right? So we think colonizing Mars is really important. Secondly, we think humanity has always evolved from a point of not knowing to a point of knowing, right? We think human evolution is defined by a constant search for knowledge, right? We don't think at any point we have stopped. For example, if the first time a human being saw a fire and said, oh, this is scary, we would have never reached a place where we're sitting in a building and debating, right? Because we think that each scientific development has tangible repercussions and ripple effects in terms of creating a new society, creating new social structures, right? We think, for example, the creation of the atomic bomb actually created the idea of human rights because we realized for the first time that human beings could actually destroy the planet, right? Which is why we focus more on the idea of human rights and humanity and all of these, right? We think therefore the social structures also change due to scientific developments, right? Thirdly, on the idea of the state, right? We think, for example, death, we think the moment the motion says that these are people on death row or life imprisonment without parole, right? We think there are 3 functions of the justice system, right? Deterrence, retribution, and rehabilitation, right? We think in this case the state has decided that the third function isn't really possible. We've agreed that we're not going to be able to rehabilitate these people and bring them back into society, otherwise, we'll not kill them and give them parole, right? However, what does this mean, right? This basically means that these people are not productive at all and they're an economic burden on the state, right? As of now, in the past, we've had 2 alternatives, right? Either we collectively pay taxes, which are then used to lock these people up in a certain area where we feed them, where we clothe them, where we say, you know what, stay in a room. Or because we do this because we don't think that they're safe enough to come engage with us and live with us as a common populace, right? We think the state can control them, but we think if you put them in society, they're a harm to individual people. We're drawing a distinction, right? However, here we have a third alternative where we can actually try to put them under state supervision in a place where they can't affect the populace, right? We think they can't tangibly go ahead and kill Piyush, right? Because he might be a murderer, right? We think that's a really good thing. So we have a third alternative where we don't have to continue paying for them, where they can actually be productive to the state, right? Why? Why is this important? Why is productivity a good metric, right? So we think the state gives you benefits, right? We think the moment all individuals gain certain benefits from the state, for example, you get roads built, the state subsidizes your education, if you're dying of hunger, the state probably gives you food, it gives you doles, right? At which point the state also, why does the state do this? Is because it realizes that saving you as an individual is better for humanity and for the state in general, right? For the evolution of the human species, right? The state has larger spatial and temporal powers which it takes to achieve an ideal end and takes all of humanity to that ideal end, right? So therefore, we think that the state looks at all individual utility and says, is training this person going to benefit humanity? Yes, therefore let's train these people, right? I'm sure they're going to come up and argue random examples saying, will you kill retarded people, will you kill? No. Why not? Because we think that even if a person is physically unable to work, we look at the benefit, right? What does it cost to keep this person alive? Not much. What are the benefits? Twofold, right? The first full benefit is that they have filial relations with other people. The second and the more important benefit is that you don't want to create an idea of the state where you randomly kill people for no reason. But if we see a good enough reason, which is literally evolution of science and a progression of the species, we're going to do it because the state sees greater productivity in that action. I'll take it 2 minutes. Yeah, let me just finish that. Therefore, the moment we see greater productivity in this activity, we think we're going to do it, right? Secondly, right? The benefits of this, right? We think there are manifold benefits of this move. Okay, I'll go.
Ashish, what is the difference between enslavement and imprisonment?
We really don't think, like for example, enslave. I really don't know, right? For example, even in prison, we make them like work. They do hard labor for punishment and all of this, right? So we don't think there's really a tangible difference, right? To an extent, please draw it, right? Secondly, benefits of science, right? Twofold benefits, right? Firstly, we're going to get minerals, right? Also, we're telling you, at no point is it going to, the risk of these death row convicts creating their own little society is going to be minimal because we're using them as like test soldiers, right? We're going to send them in and keep them under constant supervision, not by other human beings, but by drones. The moment we realize, or the moment they create a place where it is habitable, we'll send in normal people after them, right? We'll recreate that society to suit our own needs, right? We're going to keep them under supervision. We're going to see, okay, this seems like a safe time where a lot of them are surviving. Now let's go in, right? We think it's also beneficial for the convicts because now instead of being locked up in a room, they get to explore a new country and maybe there is a chance that they get to rehabilitate themselves in that eventuality, right? But we don't think they can do it here, right? And so what have we told you in this debate, right? One, we've told you that like the earth is kind of fucked. Two, we've told you that human beings have always studied, looked at knowledge from a point of not knowing to reach a point of knowing. Thirdly, we've told you that death row convicts and life in prison without parole do not get rehabilitation because we've decided that they're not worthy of it. Fourthly, we've told you the state looks at individuals from a utilitarian perspective. Fifth, science, we're proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for the speech. I invite the people of
Yeah, sure. Sir, you was keeping time? Yeah. Please give me a chair. Alright, first of all, let's start with, ladies and gentlemen, the concept of justice that we agree on, right? We think that when an individual has faced a certain number of years not knowing whether he is going to get a death penalty or not knowing whether the president is going to commute his death penalty or not, we think that that individual should not be given death sentence because in a sense he has received a dual punishment for his crimes. Firstly, he has gone through the torture of having a life within a jail. Secondly, he has always been anxious of the idea, am I going to get death? Am I going to get life? Am I sure about whether I'm going to have a life or not? This kind of an anxiety is what is the root of our case and why we root our case in the idea that their entire proposition is entirely one of torture, right? Why is it torture, ladies and gentlemen? And why is it sufficiently different from the death penalty?
there is an element of finality, there is an element of certainty in the idea that you're going to spend the rest of your life in jail, or in the idea that you're going to get a death penalty, or you're going to be hung, right? In the consequence in which you know that these sets of individuals went into space and, well, there is very little probability that I'll survive, you are an anxious individual at every point of time. You're thinking that every action that I take right now might just lead to this spaceship exploding, and or might just lead to me getting suffocated in a vacuum, right? This constant anxiety is a state of torture, ladies and gentlemen, that we think these individuals should not be subjected to, because an orderly and systematic process of justice has convicted and founded their crimes to be reasonable to demand of a death penalty and not a crime of torture plus death penalty. Secondly, seeing that we are discussing as the rational people of the world, right, it's extremely important for us to understand that we do not want to be seen as beneficiaries of a system which is inculcated and rooted within the idea of torturing individuals by virtue of them being social outcasts, or by virtue of our law machinery considering them to be someone who is different or out there and who have violated laws of society, right? It's extremely important that we understand this, because their entire case is from a utilitarian perspective, that the greater good for the greatest number is extremely important. We don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. We think that individual rights and liberties, individuals' rights to not be tortured are fundamentally important, and especially important if we are arguing as the rational people of the world and not as a state which they might perhaps argue is a selfish entity which seeks for self-perpetuation only. It's extremely important when Ashish brings out the differentiation and answers that POI regarding what is the difference between enslavement and punishment, right? The idea of putting an individual in jail is not that he's going to cut rocks for you, therefore you are putting him in that particular jail, right? The idea of putting these individuals to mass is because they will be of a societal benefit which will translate into tangible returns for individual entities in society, and this is also a very important clarification, right? When you put an individual in jail, the benefit that the society derives is a negative benefit, the idea that this individual is separated and therefore cannot cause harm. The benefit is derived to a society as an impersonal entity. Secondly, in this particular scenario, individual benefits, which are also rational people, individual people who believe in morality and who believe in emotions, are perceived as beneficiaries of a system which is torturous, or beneficiaries of a system which inculcates an idea of slavery. We think that it is wrong for us, and when Ashish places this is extremely important, right? The idea that we celebrate the idea that human beings are a species which is curious to know, which explores the world, the idea that we have scientific experiments which lead to increases in or benefits in terms of human lifespans or in terms of human convenience, they are celebrated by virtue of the fact that these individuals cared for the rest of humanity and therefore carried out these things as acts of sacrifice, or as acts which perpetuate a greater good, or even acts of curiosity. These individuals are slaves to someone else's selfish benefit. We think that this is a moral conundrum that they really need to deal with from side opposition. Regarding Ashish's lengthy arguments regarding global warming, we think that this is fundamentally problematic, right? First of all, there is a direct causation which implies that the rich in the world, the owners of large companies which are producing these large amounts of gases which are leading to benefits to a large set of people, they are not held responsible. A small sets of individuals are made responsible for saving the earth, while the actual diversity of justice, which is people who own diesel cars driving SUVs, in spite of countries like Bangladesh facing stress of flooding over and entire populations being destroyed, this diversity of justice is entirely ignored, and in order to fulfill justice at a particular level, you are ignoring a larger injustice that is being carried out in the form of actions of a few causing externalities which are causing problems to a larger number of people.
Why do you think the proletarian cannot go and emancipate themselves to creating new social relations on that planet, and therefore breaking this concept of your capitalist way oppression on earth?
Well, sure, but what about justice? What about these individuals who have spoiled society, who have caused externalities that are killing people, but they will not be punished for it, right? It's also extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, for us to understand that we are just not talking about these individuals sending research papers or like research entities or little documents, right? We're seeing these individuals as the future of human society. What these future children, if at all we colonize Mars, are being taught is that your ancestors, the reason that you survive is by virtue of the fact that your ancestors were okay with enslaving and using a set of individuals immorally in order to gain a selfish benefit, and by preserving the injustice of a larger sense in which a capitalist class is ensured, right? It's also extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, for us to understand that the idea that the question that they raise is about survival, right? The question that they raise is about human survival. We don't think that's the question. We don't think this is the only viable alternative we have. There are other alternatives like doing away with fossil fuels, like that's a big deal, right? We also think that this is a question of welfare, which is to atomic individual entities who themselves believe in morality and emotional priorities, right? These atomic individual entities, when they become beneficiaries of torture as the rational people of the world, we think that is a net harm on our collective conscience and on our libertarian principles. We become okay with enslaving an entire generation by virtue of them being social outcasts. We become okay with diluting the concept of justice or negating an entire larger concept of justice in the interest of ensuring that we survive, not even we survive, we benefit, and some of us get away with a certain injustice that they have undertaken, right? It's extremely important for us to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the entire argument that, well, we pay taxes and these individuals are there in jail by virtue of we paying taxes, well, it's particularly important that we understand that these individuals are in jail. We pay taxes, well, sure, because you are the beneficiaries of a state. You ought to pay taxes to keep these individuals in jail. It's extremely important also for us to understand that by virtue of the fact that there are larger costs, and also it's extremely important, you're killing these individuals in a different scenario, right? We understand that.
And then the legal proposition to speech and by the
right? From Vineet's speech, when he comes out and tells you that you're sending them as slaves for someone else, right? And this is why we believe they've simply thrown like this additional burden on us, which is really redundant, right? Because understand this, I'm going to clash with this on two folds. Firstly, on the idea of slavery, and secondly, on the idea of whom you're being enslaved to, right? Firstly, on the idea of whom you're being enslaved to, understand who this is, right? We believe the outcome of this is what decides whether the action is going to be a good action and we should do it, or a bad action and we shouldn't do it, right? The point being, the outcome being something that's going to benefit all of mankind. When we believe the entire society will benefit from the knowledge that we derive out of it, we don't see who is this selfish interest who's getting out like some positive benefit out of this, and we don't see this like random commie argument that they're throwing on us. We don't see who is this selfish party gaining from it, considering that knowledge is something that's going to trickle down to everybody, considering those resources are something that everyone's going to gain access to. It's not like you're just going to like monopolize the resources there. That's not what we've told you. Don't let them lie to you, right? First, secondly, on the idea of slavery, right? Understand how this is not slavery, and they can't just simply call it that. What is prison, right? The moment you put someone into prison, we don't believe like your individual choices exist, because I don't want to like, I don't choose to go into prison. I don't choose to eat that like random, like that bad roti and all that you give me every time. I don't choose to do the manual labor within the prison that you make me do. Those are the kind of activities that you force me to do simply because I am in prison. And understand who these people are, right? These are the death row convicts. These are the people who are having a life sentence without any parole. We don't believe these sort of choices that they're talking about in abstract can be applied to this context, considering these people are the people we don't even allow to get out to meet their family members, right? These are the kind of people we're talking about. If you go ahead and restrict their choice to that extent, why is it that this is something bad? Especially especially considering the fact that a benefit is coming out of it, which is going ahead and benefiting everyone, right? Coming to our case, right? Understand this, the need that we spoke to you about, which they failed to acknowledge, right? When we spoke to you about the kind of scenario that exists on Earth, when you have a depletion of resources, when the fact is that right now, because of fuel consumption, because of overpopulation and things like that, there is a dire need, right? It's something they've also accepted. We've told you, when they come up and like tell you that, oh, it was someone else's fault, why should they suffer? Understand, these people are suffering for their own actions, right? And beyond that, the fault that they're trying to pin on like the upper classes or like some developed nations is something that the entire world is going ahead and sharing the burden of currently, and something that we need to share, right? But beyond that, we need to understand that there is a need to look for, to explore alternate avenues for natural resources, and we need to go ahead and send somebody to do it, right? The question here to this in this debate is, who should you send, right? Who is a better option to send? And that's where we believe this debate hinges, right? We don't see why the convict in this case is the primary stakeholder, considering we've spoken to you about the larger ramifications for the rest of the society, and the fact being that that's something that we believe is a much bigger burden for us, especially considering the fact that right now they're just trash for us, they're just sitting in our prisons and just eating away all our resources. We don't see the benefit of going ahead and giving them all that money while at the same time deriving nothing out of it. That's it. Secondly, we spoke to you about the added benefit of the fact that science in general only goes ahead and is able to benefit humankind if you can go ahead and develop further on pure science and then later go ahead and use it in applied science, right? We spoke to you about how science in terms of like development, in terms of discoveries, etc., is a measure of human progress, and without that we don't believe we as a society can continue to like evolve, and we believe we'll hit a stagnation point, something that we believe is really wrong, right? Now, coming to the convicts, right? We spoke to you about how these are death row convicts and people serving life sentences. Understand, how is it that you decide the punishment is based on the degree of the crime you commit. So the people right now who are death row convicts or people with life sentence are the people who committed the harshest of harsh crimes. They are your serial killers and your serial rapists and all of that, and these are the people we are talking about. It's not just every prisoner we are talking about, right? The fact being that they have committed a crime grave enough for them to be in this position. The fact being that that's the degree of crime that they have committed, that we believe their punishment is this as well, right? Beyond that, on the punishment, right? When they come up and tell you that you're sending them there and this is torture, we don't see what is this qualification of torture, right? And we believe that's like a burden they've thrown on us uselessly, right? Because understand, when you're sending them there, what will they do, right? They are going to be under our supervision. What are they going to do? They go out, they are the foot soldiers, and understand, they are not the ones taking the calls on everything. At the end of the day, we have like monitoring of their actions, we have supervision of their actions, but at the same time you're letting them out, so you're not, it's not like they have a free reign, but at the same time they're allowed to go ahead and do things which they wouldn't have done in prison, right? The fact that they can roam around in a small enclosure, but yes, free, notionally free, that's something that they don't have within the prison, right? The fact being that that's the kind of torture they're talking about. We don't see how that's torture, considering we earlier sent people of our own on that planet to go ahead and conduct research. How is this torture? Is something we don't agree with that, right? The idea being, when you talk about reformation for prisoners, right, you need to understand these are people who've gone beyond that line of reformation, which is why you put them in the prison forever, right? For the rest of their life, because we believe they can't possibly reform out of it. Your POI. POI.
Considering you already have just you believe that these prisoners can't be rehabilitated, but what gives you the justification to even like whatever bound you with retribution, all of these things which are already justified objectively by the state for these prisoners?
Okay, I don't understand that question. I think it's irrelevant. I'm not going to engage with that, right? Understand this. The moment you're sending these people out, what is it that you're doing essentially, right? When we tell you that these are people who are going to set out a new civilization, right? When they come up and tell you that this civilization is going to be starting out on violence and your ancestors are going to, like people are going to say your ancestors were like prisoners and death row convicts, understand why that's not a problem for us, right? Because these ancestors that they're talking about is not like this entire like generation of prisoners who will continue to rule till a particular period, right? We believe we send them out as foot soldiers, then send our men with them to go ahead and like further go ahead and explore once we know that the conditions are good enough and we believe there are options that we can explore. So we believe we as such will be able to monopolize the kind of narrative that we will be setting out within that civilization that we are creating. So we don't believe that we're setting them out on an entirely free reign, right? Because at the end of the day, we're not sending them alone to this planet all the time. We believe after a time period we will go ahead and change according to the need that's required, right? Ladies and gentlemen, where does this debate hinge, right? It's not about it's not about whether this convict deserves to go or not, right? Because the fact being that because he is within that life sentence means that he does deserve a very harsh punishment, right? That's something that's justified. The point here is whether or not the rest of the community needs to have a benefit and whether it's okay to use these people for that benefit, right? The kind of a state that my first speaker spoke to you about, one which goes ahead and invests in its individuals with a quid pro quo in mind, the fact that you are at the end of the day a tool of that larger state, right? We believe this is a prisoner, especially in this scenario, is a much better tool that we can use. And the question here is, which sort of a tool would you rather send? Would you rather go ahead and like conscript your citizens and send them, or would you rather send these prisoners? And that's where the debate hinges. We believe these prisoners are a far better option for us because they deserve it, because they're not useful, because they're a burden on our economy, because nobody else is one which is a better position to do this. For all these reasons, we're incredibly proud of it.